Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us today. I am Elisa Garn, founder and CEO of Level Next. Joining me today on our Meet Our Mentors series is Ben Taylor. In my opinion, one of the AI leading experts in the entire world. Not that I know many of you, but by way of introduction, Ben, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. It's funny, I'm 39, but I think I look like I'm 50, like mid 50s. I've got a lot of gray in my beard.
You just have a lot of
And
wisdom on your face. That's
I
fine.
know that's right. I'm advertising wisdom. And it's funny, I used to tell people my gray came from the hedge fund, but if you look at my beard pre-startup, post-startup, it all came from the startup. So my
So are you
background.
saying that I'm gonna go a little more gray in my?
Oh, you're gonna start getting some gray streaks coming out. It's and that's one of the things that you and I have talked about offline. That I until you do a startup, you don't you don't really know you don't know how hard it is. And so, real quick, my career to bring people up to the startup. I loved math. I studied chemical engineering. I worked for Intel and Micron for 5 years. So anything related to data, there's a good chance I had an opportunity to play with it. And then I went and joined a high performance computing hedge fund as a quant, which is slang for quantitative analysts. Built out a 600 GPU cluster in the office. This was in 2012. Just total, totally bonkers. And then I joined HireVue. And one of the reasons I joined HireVue is I heard about their Sequoia Capital round. So they got a $20 million round from Sequoia. And for Utah, that is unusual. So other Sequoia companies in Utah are companies like Qualtrics and Health Catalyst. And so that drew me to HireVue. I was their chief data scientist for 4 years, built out their data science team, and delivered their AI intellectual property, but also their AI product. And then after 4 years, I got the itch to do a startup. So I co-founded a deep learning AutoML platform with David Gonzalez. Did that for 3 years, and that was acquired by DataRobot at the beginning of 2020. And then I was at DataRobot for 2 years and joined a new employer recently.
Which I know is quite the buzz right now. So I know you can't tell us who it is, but can you tell us a bit about what you're going to be doing and like what that future looks like as far as where you're taking your career next?
Yeah, I don't know if much has changed because even when I was at my old employer, I would tell people I'm not selling the product or the services. Really, I'm selling AI. And if you're selling AI, there's a lot of companies you can work for.
Mm.
Because I get more excited about democratizing AI and people using it daily. And I think we're going to get to a place in the future where it'll be almost impossible to go an hour without using AI in a meaningful way.
Mm.
It's it feels so much more aligned with the human purpose. Or it feels like a creativity maximizer. Sometimes people see AI as being anti-human. Oh no, Terminator, or AI is going to take away all of our jobs. But I see it as allowing us to unlock our full creative potential. And so here's a thought for the audience. Unfortunately, most people are drastically overqualified for the work they're going to do tomorrow. And that's unfortunate because the brain can do so much more. So think about like the most challenging things you've done where you're really trying to work on a hard problem. That's what you should be doing most of the time. But instead, we read emails, do different things and that was what I noticed with my first job. As I had a master's in chemical engineering, and I felt like high school me could do this job, and it was true for most of it. But you're also dealing with tools that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they don't want high school you doing that because they want some level of accountability that I guess comes from school.
I guess.
I guess. Um, I've got 3 kids, and my wonderful wife jokes that she actually lives with 4 kids. So I, yeah, I never want to grow up.
Well, speaking of which, on a hobby level, which definitely not something I was doing as a kid, but we're connected on several social media platforms. So I feel like I get this really well-rounded version of Ben from things that you do in your personal life, and then things that you're doing with your career. But I did see recently that you just kind of like bailed in the morning for a trail run and ran the equivalent of a marathon in the mountains.
Yeah,
Just
I like trail running in the mountains. I like being in nature, but it's a good time to think. And so some people they get anxious about the time commit. So I went on a 21-mile run before work, had my first coffee meeting at 8:30. So I was able to do that and go to the meeting. And some people look at that 4.5 hours or 5 hours, however long I was running, that's a big time commit. But I'm thinking about problems. I'm thinking about issues. I'm thinking about communication approaches, and I'll actually stop and take notes. So on my phone, I'm constantly taking notes on different ideas, listening to audiobooks, which I think is so fun that we have. I can't imagine reading a paper book. That would be awful. But if I can be running, listening to audiobooks, it doesn't feel like a waste of time.
Well, I like the fact that like it's part of it is the investment of time in yourself, and we all know how important it is to balance like self-care and deep learning, and like the way that we use our brains I think is interesting because we definitely need rest periods. You need times, like that's what sleep is for most people, where that's the way somebody described it to me once, where sleep is essentially your brain's way of defragmenting from the day. So just like a computer, it's compacting all of the information into little bits, together instead of scattered. And that in order to make room and figure out like, what do I need to hang on to? What do I need to remove? And I think that exercise or whatever it is, that reading, these different activities and hobbies that each of us find to refuel or energize. Some people do see it as a waste of time or the time commit, as you say. But man, if it's adding value to your life, either in the approach of this gives me time to sit and reflect or recharge or solve bigger problems in the long run, I don't know how you could see that as a bad investment. But I will say 5 hours on a trail run before an 8:30 coffee would not be the way that I would choose.
And that's not something I do every day, but I do like to do bigger runs at least once a week. I think sometimes as people, we don't realize how soft we get, just not like physically, but just you're not using your body the way it was intended. Like if we went back in time and compared ourselves to some of our ancestors, I think we'd be pretty embarrassed with what they're capable of, which I think is funny. So me going on a 20-mile run in the morning, I think for people in the tech community, they say, oh, that sounds like a lot. But if I went back 100 years ago, they'd be like, why didn't you do 40? Like they would, like,
yeah, we're also only living to like 45, so
yeah.
They had to get their mileage in before they couldn't run anymore. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about because I know that you recently transitioned from one company to the next, and you've had experience in startups. As one of the things that we talk about with Level Next and the importance of mentorship is how you pivot in a career. Like, how do you capitalize on going from one company to the next, one industry to the next, whether you're taking a next step in your career? But I feel like you've been really successful throughout your own journey that you shared, not in recreating yourself, but leveraging what did you have from that previous experience that is now lending to this new job search. So with your current situation and where you ended up, I would love for you to talk about like what were some of the things that you did or approaches that you took to help you diversify your opportunities and really create options for yourself that led to the decision you ultimately made.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's an evolution in someone's career. So when you start out early on, one of the things I talk about is you're told a lie, and that lie is job security. So your first company, when I joined my first company, that welcome to the family, you're going to be here for a long time. It's almost that mindset that you're going to retire here. And that's a lie. Companies do layoffs all the time for reasons that are sometimes out of control. Like it doesn't necessarily matter what the market's doing. Like people make mistakes. You've got competitors. And so it wasn't until I joined HireVue that I saw firsthand what market security looked like. I was so impressed by those engineers. And I still feel this way today. Lauren Larson, the CTO HireVue, he built such a strong engineering org there. I felt like if the CEO walked into the room and said, I'm so sorry, we're missing payroll, we were not able to get to the next round of funding, you're all laid off effectively Friday, this week, every engineer in the room would get a raise from the market. And when I realized that, I really kind of fell in love with more people should have market security. Because if you have market security, you can be more bold, more innovative. You can also put up with less bullshit in the market. Like, if you have an employer that is having issues, you really don't have to put up with it. You can go somewhere else. And I think that continues to evolve. So for people that go into senior leadership or executive positions, you have to measure performance, and that performance is your market, your job security, your market securities begins to be measured in quarters. And you're never all in the green zone. Like there's always issues, there's politics that you deal with. So going back to kind of the core question that you asked, one of the issues I had when I was looking for a job the last couple of months is I don't really want a job. Like I want a mission, because I want something where I can put in all of my energy. I'm committed, I'm bought in. I want something that consumes me, and getting paid well to do various tasks in tech, that's not what I'm looking for. I have a lot of fun trying to find a company that thinks they're going to take over the world, because I like that competitive energy where you feel like you're working for a juggernaut, or you feel like you're working for a company that has a breakthrough potential. And so that's what it took a while for me to find that. Yeah, it was a crazy couple months, but I'm very happy. I feel even more convinced that I made the right decision after joining. And a funny thing too, to ask people that are starting out their careers, one of the things I like to say is you're not qualified to know what a good job is. So if you're in your first job, pick the biggest vanity brand you can think of, a brand that is normally associated with a good job. You're not qualified to know if it's a good job, because you need to compare. You need to, and so I encourage people, when they start switching jobs, they will finally be qualified to know what a good job looks like. But that means they might have to step into a bad job. Maybe they had a job at some vanity brand FANG company, and then they stepped into an awful job. But the thing with awful jobs is you learn something. So some people that have had terrible jobs, very toxic cultures, and then they bounce a year later, you learned a lot. You learned about all sorts of things that you can take into your new employer. And so I think there's an optimism if you think about everything being tuition. So when you go through hard things in life, not just through careers, but generally hard things, if you think about the tuition, that is valuable. You're a better person for it, hopefully.
Well, I appreciate that view of how experience becomes currency, because I do think that this is the way that I've been explained. People will often ask, like, how are things going with your startup? And, how are you doing? And it's like, here's the thing. I feel like I was on the benefit side of being very aware of what I was getting into with a startup, loneliness and long hours and really, really difficult times and wondering if you're going to, pay your mortgage next month type stuff. I knew what I was getting into. But the thing is like, even if you hear the tornado warning going off, it doesn't make the tornado suck any less. Like when the tornado comes, you still see cows flying around in the air and, shingles are flying off the roof, but you knew that it was coming. And so hopefully you had a better opportunity to prepare yourself for those things. And I think with first-time jobs, I also use the analogy a lot of how much our careers are like our dating lives. So the first job that you get is your first love. It's your first boyfriend or girlfriend, and you expect so much from it. You expect that job to meet and fulfill all of your needs. And the longer that you work, the more companies that you work for, the more jobs that you have and colleagues that you meet, I think you're more capable and mature to understand that it's unlikely that that company or that job is going to meet all of those needs for you. So how do you satisfy the other parts of yourself that are not being met by that one particular opportunity? And a big part of what we're selling at Level Next, why we are choosing to invest our resources into the power of one-on-one mentorship, is we want to be able to empower people to diversify their career opportunities. So you're not in a reactive state when your company does a layoff, or when you find out that your particular industry is becoming automated. Like, we want people to feel like that's an opportunity rather than a risk. So investing in mentor relationships and building networks and diversifying your skills and finding out ahead of time proactively how all of those skills are going to be able to translate into various career paths is ultimately like where we feel that change happens. And so one of the questions I have for you along that vein, our hypothesis, which I feel like is rooted in data, because I know that's big for you, is that the market is shifting where work dynamics traditionally have been primarily employee employer relationships. I make a commitment to you, I pay you a salary, it's indefinite until there's a change in that expectation. But we've already seen a rise of the gig economy. More and more people are starting side hustles, either to express, monetize their hobbies or just create, secondary multiple streams of revenue. So we know that that's rising. Where do you see the future of work in terms of, do you believe it's going to balance out at some point where we'll still have a primary employee-employer relationship, or do you feel like we'll have a shift that there will be more of an expectation of almost like hiring gig workers for specific projects or phases of time, or just changing the dynamic of where it's there forever until it's not? Like, do you think that's going to change?
Oh, that's an interesting concept. Sometimes I try to bucket people into different types of work. So you have people that are more extroverted. You have people that are influencers. So one of the opportunities I have is I am more of an influencer in technology, and so there are other opportunities to endorse non-competing products or to speak. For some people that are introverted, where they're just deep tech, I guess there's always opportunities for them to consult on the side. Um, and I think there's value with that. Like one of the things you're hunting for is a variety of experience. And so if you're stuck in one employer, you're only going to see that perspective. If you have side consulting, side projects, if you're traveling the world speaking, you're going to be exposed to other things. And so I think one of the benefits of having mentors is you are able to absorb some of their experience. I've worked in semiconductor quant finance, HR, marketing for 2 years, worked with sales, and I feel like for me that brings a multi-threaded perspective. And I think sometimes you need that for problems, because if you only live in one domain, you'll only see the problem from one point of view. And if you've been able to jump different domains, and that's something that I celebrate, that I think the other issue with people coming out of school is you don't know what you like. Like if we had a new college grad here live and we were really grilling them on what they chose to study, I think we would quickly realize they had a very weak foundation. And why did you pick that? Like, why did you go with that? Why would you pick that? It's kind of this random walk. And that can also be true of careers. And so one of the things I didn't know about myself is I fell in love with marketing. So I had no exposure to marketing when I started working with some of the ultra creatives there that live in the marketing space. The other thing that was quite sad is I used to be kind of critical of people that were creative, because I was coming from a very math STEMmy background, where if you're liberal arts, if you're an artist, then maybe that means you weren't as smart as me or something. That is, I don't see it that way now. I see it a complete opposite. If anything, you're more courageous, because with math and some of the analytical thinkers, a lot of things are black and white. If we're trying to do a marketing video, what are the right answers? Well, there's general approaches, but you really have to kind of be this hero and go into the gray, and you have to make decisions that an analytical thinker doesn't know how to make. And so I think that's something I would encourage people I interact with is, so two things that are often overlooked for people in their careers: network and storytelling are unbelievably powerful. If you build up a really strong network, and if you become an expert storyteller, you'll never go a week without having job offers if you are on the market. And storytelling impacts every aspect of your life. It impacts your ability to recruit, your ability to raise money, your ability to interview for a job, your ability to sell, your ability to tell a story in marketing that can to speak on stage. There's so many aspects of storytelling that are just not discussed. And if anything, in college, they teach you the wrong things.
I think that college teaches us, well, I don't know. I didn't go to college, but I've
Oh,
definitely heard
good.
other people say that college for them was, I think that there is value there. And even if it's just understanding a bit more of the lens of the world and what not to do, like you said, like I think in going back to dating, sometimes your first boyfriend or girlfriend or those 10 dates that you went on, the value that they brought for you was knowing what to say no to next time. So I don't think that I'm not a big advocate of like going to college is a waste of money and resources. For me, it wasn't the right path. But I don't think that I don't think that there is a line in the sand of people that should and shouldn't go to college. I think it's empowering to know that we have a market that can support and sustain people on different career paths that don't require one or the other, industry pending. But I find that very exciting about the time that our generation is working right now, because it's not I just feel like there's more choice, which is fun.
Yeah, there's a funny college scenario that I would play out if I could go back in time. So if I could go back in time, knowing some of the emotional connections that VCs have with Stanford, I would have done everything possible to get into Stanford, like from the beginning. And in the first semester, I would have no friends. I would study like 100 hours for the week. I'd never take a break. Saturday, Sunday, I'd study. No friends. I don't talk to people. And my goal would be to try to ace all my classes the first semester as best as I could and try to be the class favorite best as I could. And I'm sacrificing all my social life to do this. And then I would drop out of Stanford. And then I'd go to VCs and I would say I was bored out of my mind at Stanford. And this is my startup idea. And then I'd raise a ton of capital. And then that would be my new tuition. And I'd raise people that are much smarter than me. And we'd try to go after building this impossible thing. And that would be an example of the best that would be the best return on tuition you could ever pay for college, because VCs would think you were a savant and you're not. You just game the system.
Well, I mean, speaking of the fact that you have this newfound love for marketing, wow, like understanding the emotional state of that connection and how you're going to basically how you're going to exploit that, but in a way that, I mean, it doesn't negatively impact anyone. You're just playing the game.
So something that's shocking to me, I have a professor friend at Stanford, and he was telling me VCs in the past would regularly reach out to him and they'd say, do you have any interesting students that are doing anything novel? And they're trying to liquidate a $200 million fund. But the issue is not the fund. The issue is they have another $200 million fund that's coming online in a few months, and this one has to be gone. And so it's hilarious. If you are some bright-eyed, bushy-tailed college kid at Stanford that's standing out, please let me throw some money into whatever you're going to do.
Is there data to support the likelihood of success in that? Or is it, is there what do you
There's
think
data to support the Stanford bias. So at HireVue, we analyzed all colleges in the U.S., and Stanford by far had the highest correlation towards job acceptance. Harvard was number 10, Stanford was number 1. Wow. So if you had a Stanford email address on your resume, no other college beat that with your acceptance rates.
That is
in the job market.
Fascinating. Yeah. Was there anything like when you were at HireVue, because that was more of my back. I think that's actually when we connected, was when you were at HireVue and I was working as an HR practitioner. When you were building that technology, and of course not sharing anything proprietary or confidential, but was there anything about what you guys were building in interview, video interview technology, especially with AI, that made you uncomfortable or like, whoa, this is a little scary that we're empowered with this kind of information?
I think initially HireVue was pretty aggressive on the Technophile front, where we were so excited that we could pull features out like micro expression and like not just audio and what you said, but video as well. And they've since kind of self-corrected on that. So my understanding today is HireVue does not use any video features, but they do use content of what you said during an interview. we were very proactive when it came to humans have unconscious bias, and so we were very proactive when it came to adverse impact mitigation, meaning removing the bias or reducing it if it exists. And even today, I would say HireVue is best in class, period, when it comes to dealing with racist, sexist, ageist data. No other company comes close to what they've done. Because what my team did, we really moved the industry forward with the correct approaches to deal with bias data. But after I left, Lindsay, the chief data scientist there, they took it even further. So so when you're talking about bias data or removing bias from algorithms, I don't think you can find a company better than HireVue when it comes to that. And the big thing with Black Mirror AI ethics is you need to be proactive. And I think HireVue was surprised because they realized in the news there were just some themes emotionally with video that people couldn't get over. So the Wall Street Journal did a piece called "The Robots Are Hiring" when I was there, and it is a hit piece, but it's pretty interesting. I think people are interesting. What triggers them, what they react to emotionally. There's actually you being in HR, I think you'll appreciate this. So they talk about the 3 prongs of HR. So it has to be performance based, has to be job related, and it can't have bias. Data scientists, they'll agree with 2 of those. They'll agree with like performance based, can't have bias, but they get really annoyed with job relatedness because they want to go after your social feed. They want to go after your accelerometer data on your phone. They want to go after everything because that'll be predictive of performance and without bias. But the funny thing is I would joke that there's a 4th prong. So the 4th prong is predetermined destiny.
Ooh.
So if I came up with some algorithmic approach to interview you and it's performance based, there's no bias, I can prove there's no bias, and it's related to the job because I'm measuring your brain's familiarity with the content I'm flashing at you. If I go into the 4th prong space where the conclusion is, I'm sorry, you were born with the wrong brain to have a job at Google, that people still like that is, some people argue we already have that with the SAT exams and ACTs. Like I can't get a perfect score in the SAT, but there are people out there that can. Genetically, I can't. So it's interesting. People don't like predetermined destiny. Everyone wants to feel like they have an opportunity to do whatever they want, especially in America.
But yeah, I think that's working in HR. That was one of the most amazing insights of expanding my experience to, workforces in other countries. As I do feel like in the U.S. we are very, very individually driven and motivated. Freedom and liberty is center to our core and our identity as citizens. But it was interesting to me the first time that we were working on benefits for the employees that work in other countries, and how the approach was very different, where they were much more motivated communally rather than individually. At least for me at the time, I was in my 20s and I had no exposure to that, and I just could not wrap my head around, like, why would they not want to capitalize on what best benefits them? Like, why do they want to put it into a pool and split it evenly instead of like be paid for their own performance? It was humbling, and I'm really, really grateful that I had the opportunity to see that and understand the differences in even just culturally how we process things like that differently and expectations. But I think you're right. I think it also gets into sometimes even religious expectations and why some people are more predisposed to wanting or needing to follow religion versus choosing an independent route of spirituality. That need to feel choice and connection, and like it's part of our being self-aware. I think that once we feel that those things are taken away from us and it's just, we're going through the motions of checking boxes to get to a predetermined path, feels very alarming in a way, like,
Yeah.
well, then you start getting into therapy sessions of like, what are we even here for? What's the point if it's all just laid out for us?
Well, it's interesting when you think about human purpose because people talk about universal income. So if AI can do everything, so if AI can pick up socks, pick up the kids from school, like do all this stuff, well, what do we do? And people have talked about universal income that, well, don't worry, every American will be guaranteed, or everyone in the world will be guaranteed $50,000 in income. And what you realize is if you could surf every day and drink a beer and take a nap in a hammock, that sounds amazing today. Like I'll sign up for that tomorrow. But if that is your existence, if that's what you do for years on end, you will not be happy. Like humans, we need to be challenged. We need the hero's journey is stamped into our DNA. We celebrate the hero, but many of us are on our own hero's journey. We want to understand and I think one of the interesting things, people don't talk about death that much. It's kind of it it happens to all of us. We experience it, people we love around us, we lose people, but they don't really talk about it. And I think there's something great about that. Not that we don't talk about it. I think there's something great that our stories end. Our stories will end in the future. And what story do we want to be told? What do we want to leave behind? And I hope I hope many of us are fighting for a better future for the people that are, let's innovate, let's allow more people to have more creative cycles. Let's reduce pain and suffering. We can do so much in healthcare. Let's leverage all of our healthcare experience to improve care in the future.
Well, and not even just in, I think globally, like, yes, humanity's sake, but also how much opportunity there is within our careers and workforces, because I feel like that's been intentionally separated for so long that it's like work is work and life is everything else. And it just like I do feel like that is the point in time that we're at. Like we're at this catalyst of people are starting to adopt the sense that like our work and our life really does coincide, which is interesting when you think of the history of how work got to where we are now, where we used to eat what we killed and what we harvested, and we lived in a way that helped us survive and sustain. So the work that we did outside of the home was directly correlated to our homes. And then industrial age coming in, and we started to leave those farms and move into cities and start sharing resources, but also just the dynamics of our life changed. I think that what's interesting is on the other side of this pandemic, we're starting to see a shift back to the work that we do is directly related to our livelihood and our communities and our families and those that we choose to spend time with within our networks. And that I think is very interesting in a way, because I don't think that it'll look the same as, farming and ranching on land. But the fact that with technology and with the advanced knowledge that we have now, knowing how exponentially more it's going to continue to evolve and grow, probably to a point that we destroy ourselves, but who knows? But knowing that like we're having so much more connection between that balance of understanding that, companies are seeing the value in investing in employee experiences and helping empower them to feel more fulfilled, and seeing it through more of the lens of the individual instead of through the lens of how can I exploit this person and get every ounce that I can from them until they wear themselves out and I bring somebody else on board. That to me is one of the most important evolutions of technology and how it's impacting the human experience, is having to reflect on that human dynamic that I feel like for the last century or so we've kind of shied away from.
Yeah. No, in listening to you reminded me of something. I think for many people, they think about jobs as work, but there are people that find jobs where they feel like life. Like here's an example, like me speaking in Madrid, having dinner open air with some of the other speakers, both fascinating individuals, drinking wine and eating amazing food. That doesn't feel like work. It feels like the pinnacle of what it means to be alive. Like you are, and so there are careers out there that will feed the soul, that they'll challenge you intellectually, but that's why I like being more extroverted, where you're meeting interesting people, you're traveling, going to interesting places. Ultimately, you have to figure out how it all makes money. You can't do stuff for funsies all the time. Like it has to make money. But part of making money is traveling and networking and selling and partnerships. Another quick thought. I know we're over time. I'm happy to keep going. I run 30 or 40 miles a week. I already try to on these trails. And one of the things I think about on a regular basis is the individual that made these trails is dead. So he died of cancer. The guy that had the little excavator, and he made 80 miles of trails. And the positive impact that he has made on hundreds and hundreds of lives is pretty profound. Like, so even though I'm in technology and I want to use AI applications in healthcare, and I hope I can point to something in the future that has impacted many, many millions of people, whether it's not through me directly, it could be through me indirectly, there's still a chance that this individual with this excavator did more good than I did, which is okay. Like so it's just an interesting mindset that there's a lot of ways to offer a lot of good back to the world. And so me running trails every week, I definitely appreciate what that individual did. They're making my life better. And it's just interesting to think about what will you leave behind?
That's such a beautiful thought, and frankly, a good place to wrap up for us, because I do know that it's a frustration for people sometimes when they maybe don't feel connected to their work, or they don't see what is the bigger impact of what I'm doing today. And if they're not in a super sexy industry, or if they're not in a job maybe that's highly recognized or even highly valued by an organization, trying to think through, what is the ripple impact of what I'm doing today, and how is it influencing the lives, hopefully for better, for people in the future. So for some, it's obvious and it's on the surface and it's right there and it's palatable and you can touch it and it's right there. But I think that for everybody that chooses to get up and go to work every day, there is an impact on someone, at least an individual, whether it's a customer directly or indirectly, or a patient, if it's in healthcare, or your family members that are benefiting from the effort and what you're bringing home. I think that there's really, it's just sad to me that not everybody can see that impact so directly, because I know that another thing that's so important to human nature is we want to feel valued, we want to feel recognized, and we want to feel that our efforts are connected to something greater than ourselves. Even though we're all self-centered by nature, I also think that it's quite beautiful that we have this other side of wanting to have legacy that outlasts ourselves. Maybe sometimes that's from an insecure place in ourselves, but I like to believe the best in people, and I think that it's not usually that way. I think it's more that we want to leave a lasting impact and not be forgotten, and feel like our efforts and our life wasn't in vain and not at the expense of anything, and that it made something better. So what you shared, I think, with the excavation in those trails is just an awesome reminder for each of us to look internally of how whatever we're doing today in our jobs and in our future opportunities, the impact that we can have on others. So Ben, thank you so much for all of your wisdom. And I do know we're over time, but oh my gosh, as it goes, I feel like I could talk to you forever. So I appreciate that you
Likewise.
minutes with us today. I know that you're in process of getting set up as one of our mentors next.
Yep.
So yeah, for any of our audience that wants to connect with Ben, you can find him on levelnext.com here in the next few days. And we will eagerly be awaiting hearing your announcement of where it is that you've landed, because I know that's something that's coming soon, but not quite ready for the masses. So anything else that you want to share before we part?
Yeah, I think in line with what you were just saying, all of us have a unique vector in the universe. And so one of the things I would encourage us all to think about is you have a unique superpower. What does that look like times 10, times 100? And so figuring out what you need to do to accomplish you times 10, that should be the career that we all fight for. And so I think that's something that's really exciting that everyone listening can think about. What is your unique superpower, and how can you throw fuel on that? Mm-hmm. What do you need to become? Because that's where things get really exciting. That's where your impact will be truly unique and significant, because you're pointing in your own unique vector, and so am I. And we might have some overlap or interest that we share, but the things you can do, I can't, and vice versa. Like there's some things that we all have internally that I think are really exciting.
Yeah. In that way, we are all snowflakes, but not in the negative connotation way.
Yeah.
Some are similar, but no two the same.
Yeah.
All right, Ben. Well, thanks again so much for being here. Again, we just encourage anybody that wants to learn from Ben in a mentorship capacity. I can attest that he is incredible to learn from, but also just insightful and very empowering and encouraging. So until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you later.